Ilka Cassidy of Holzraum Systems is going to start the summit off with a high-level overview of women's experiences with construction roles. And we have a special guest who's going to join us for a few moments after Ilka, Mariana Pickering of EMU Systems. She has an announcement. And then first up on our panel is going to be Josie Costantini, a project manager at Schilthuis Construction in Caledonia, Ontario. Then Beth Campbell, who works in project management for Unity Homes in Keene, New Hampshire. Then Kat Campbell, no relation, but she's a carpenter and envelope specialist, worker owner at New Frameworks in Burlington, Vermont. Anna Heath is a carpenter and project manager at Maine Passive House in Bethel, Maine. MC MacPhee is a carpenter and teaches at the Endeavour Center at the Georgian College and George Brown College, all of which are in Ontario. And then we have Deborah Fields, an operations manager over here on the West Coast at Cascade Built in Seattle, Washington. And of course, all the work we do at the Accelerator is supported by and made possible by our sponsors. Our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Supply, Bax Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric, Partel, RDH Building Science, Stow Corp, Zola Windows, our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, and our patron sponsors, BRNA Consulting Engineers, Brennan Insulation and Air Tightness, Innotech Windows and Doors, and US Engineered Wood T-Stud. And tonight we have thanks very much to our summit sponsor, Walsh Construction, and we have a message from Becky Bicknell.
Hi everyone, I'm Becky Bicknell from Walsh, and we're so excited to be sponsoring this fabulous gathering of so many great women working in the sustainable construction field from across the nation. That's really exciting for us. Next slide. So Walsh is a general contractor based in Portland, Oregon, but we work in both the Portland and Seattle markets, and we consider ourselves these days or experts in high performance multifamily construction. And we work primarily with a lot of nonprofit and housing authority clients. So we're trying to meld those goals of high performance construction and affordability. And it's challenging and fun, as many of you know, but we love working collaboratively with experts out there to help accomplish that goal. And next slide. So here's an example of some of our projects. We're excited at Walsh to be led in our efforts by some great women. We have Elizabeth Reinhardt as a general manager. Sharon Libby is our quality control director. And we are excited that our Hobson Place project here is led 50% of the project management team is women, and that's a first for us. And so we're excited to have that accomplishment, as well as a women-led design team and ownership team. So it's very exciting to have that representation and to have our first residential passive house project in Seattle. So have a great summit today, and thanks for including us. Here's
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Becky. And now Ilka, but before we get to Ilka, sorry, I forgot to introduce Sydney Gladu, the Accelerator's staff writer, who will be the question concierge and is helping us out tonight. So, but first, let's hear from Ilka.
Okay, so yeah, hi. I am very excited about the summit, of course, and I want to thank the Passive House Accelerator and especially Mary James, who fully embraced this topic. And she not only started interviewing women for the summit right away when we talked about it, but the accelerator also made this a topic for the entire month. And we also started this new podcast that I'm very excited about. So yeah, so I went to school for architecture in Germany and have been practicing here in the States for about 17 years, of which I have been focusing on passive house for the last 8 years and on offsite manufacturing for the last 5 years. So by shifting to passive house and prefabrication, I found myself very much on the technical side of a project, moving more and more into construction and construction methods rather than being the design architect. I like the puzzle solving qualities of envelope design and prefabrication a lot. I just wish there were more women around to work with. So let's look at the first slide. There are definitely, besides general equal opportunity goals, there are some good reasons why women should get hired in construction and why women might want to work there as well. So a McKinsey study shows that gender diverse companies are more likely to achieve higher profitability. With new construction jobs expected to balloon in 2022, the industry will have to tap into a bigger pool of available workforce, and they will have to start looking to recruit more women. And then the gender pay gap is actually much smaller in construction than in other occupations. So I was actually very curious how many women are actually working in construction and how does it compare to the rest of the AEC segment, the architecture, engineering, construction. So next slide. Yeah, so women make up 47% of all employed individuals. Next slide. Of all the people working in construction, women comprise only 10.3%. Next slide. So women working in construction numbered 1.5% of the entire US workforce. Next slide. And of those women in construction jobs, 72% work off-site. Next slide. So reasons for underrepresentation of women in the construction industry that are named are advancement, women feel passed over, injury because of poorly fitted equipment, discrimination, exclusion, and the lack of role models. On the other hand, there is still a lot of growth happening in women owners in the last 5 to 10 years. Next slide. So if we look at architecture, the statistics are a little different. So women start out strong with 50% signing up to become registered architects, but only 17% actually do get registered. And then towards the top, the presence of women is really thinning out, and only 2 women ever received the AIA Gold Medal out of 75 or 76. There's also a pretty high gender pay gap. Next slide. So in engineering, the statistics are different again. Besides having a small base of women who start a degree in engineering, there is a very large rate of women leaving the programs and the profession. Next slide. So I also looked at the passive house community. 30% of CPHCs and CPHDs are women. And the builder percentage is pretty much consistent with the general construction statistics. And in general, there are a lot more CPHCs than certified builders. Next slide. And here are some resources that we all put together. And we're going to make them available through, I guess, the Accelerator website or, you know, some way. So this was just a really kind of quick overview of some statistics and what are the key takeaways from this. Of course, there's a lot that needs to be done to equalize the presence and pay gap between women and men, and there need to be several paths to do that. From my perspective, I find it very interesting and promising that there's a lot of talk about breaking out of isolated professions and an emphasis on collaboration between design and construction. In the prefab industry, that is already happening, and that's exactly actually how I ended up on the construction side. I see a great opportunity for women to actually migrate into construction through the path of technology and architectural design, because there is quite an abundance of skilled workforce available. I consider it as an entry point where the transition is more gradual and less intimidating. But yeah, there need to be many other ways to make construction a viable, comfortable career option to consider for women. And I actually can't wait to hear more perspectives from the panelists and the audience. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ilka. And now Mariana Pickering from AIMU Systems is here to give us a little announcement that might help get more women interested in passive house construction.
Yeah, I just have a short announcement. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me today. Really excited to see what everybody ends up talking about. I think the subject of women's education is something kind of near and dear to my heart. I went to an all-girls school growing up that my mom was a teacher at. Female education or education of girls has been something that's important in our family for a long time. And there's something to be said for creating a learning environment that's just a little less intimidating, as Ilka said, or a little bit more open and inclusive to all gender inclusivity. So one of the things we would like to see is more female trainers in Passive House as well. And in order to have female trainers in Passive House, we've got to have more female students in Passive House. We specialize in the CPHT courses, the Certified Passive House Tradesperson courses, accredited with the Passive House Institute. And the percentage of female students has historically been pretty low. I think we've only had just over 20 female students in the 5 years we've been teaching it, 4 or 5 years we've been teaching it. So at Mary's excellent suggestion, thank you, I've created a little interest form, and I'm gonna put the link in chat, or someone's going to put the link. Thank you, Sydney. And basically we just wanna gauge interest to see kind of your reactions to what kind of learning environment you consider gender inclusive and what would be a more comfortable way for you to learn Passive House. And you know, I'm personally very interested to know if there's any of you who already have that Passive House expertise under your belt. You know, can we convince you to become trainers as well, and really kind of, you know, lead from a position of example. So I'm excited to see what happens for the rest of the day. Thanks for the invitation, Mary. And if anybody is interested in that, please just check the link in chat.
Thanks, Mariana. And now let's get started with Josie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Josie Costantini. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in high performance building, specifically passive house construction, through project management role. Next slide. So a little background on me. I did my bachelor's degree in Ontario, University of Toronto in architecture. I did my master's in building science. I'm a certified passive house consultant through the FIA standard, which is the standard through the US. And I am currently working at Schilthuis Construction, Inc. as a project manager. We specialize in commercial, industrial, and multi-residential buildings, specifically passive house construction. So why construction? What led to getting me here, and how's it going? Well, where it started was a long time ago when I was younger. Watching HGTV was my favorite pastime. And then it grew into home renovations with my family, mainly my dad. He was always the kind of guy who said he never wanted to hire anybody to do the work for him. So he said he could always learn it. So that was where I kind of started building hands-on. That led into how it has progressed. It progressed through high school. I was in shop classes, the only girl in all the shop classes, of course. I lived in the tech hall back then. I did the architectural design classes as well. From there, it went into building projects for friends and family. The quality wasn't that great, but at least I was getting my hands-on skills. And then from there, architecture and building science in university. And to further my knowledge, well-rounded, I took some extra courses in plumbing and electrical in college to get some more hands-on work with things I found that they weren't teaching me in design. My first opportunity came at Schilthuis Construction. They gave me the opportunity to work and learn as a project manager. They basically built me from the ground up. I was just a young student when I started there, and they took the opportunity to mold and teach me about the industry, which I've been grateful for. And also Ryerson provided a pathway into Passive House for me, as they provided me with my CS certification through their program. So that was a great opportunity. It was an introduction into the Passive House world. And then how's it going? Well, I've completed about 3 multi-unit residential Passive House buildings in Ontario so far. We have, I think, 3 more ongoing this year, and at least 3 of 4 maybe slated for starting in 2022. Schilthuis Construction, we've become hopefully the leaders in high efficiency multi-residential building in the Hamilton area, maybe even GTA. It's become sort of our niche. We've even started consulting or advising for projects where there's a contractor that might be unfamiliar with Passive House buildings, giving advice and just things that we've learned over the few projects we've done. So I enjoy the collaboration and problem solving involved in being a project manager. Working as the middle ground between the trades on site and the designers of the building allows for a well-rounded knowledge. I most enjoy the aspect of problem solving on site, from my opinion, where there might be site conditions that arose unexpectedly. Oh yeah, thank you. Next slide. So my experience in the construction industry have been mostly all positive. I came in as a very young woman with not a lot of experience, but I had a great team that was willing to take the time and mold and teach me. Schilthuis is a family-owned company that is priding themselves in workmanship, relationships, and values. So in the sense, I could not have picked a better company to introduce me to the construction world. Coming in as a young woman, they made me feel welcomed, important, and acknowledged. A few points that I have learned over the years that have made my construction experience positive are the following points. The first being confidence in my knowledge. At the very beginning of my career, I was very unsure how to speak up in meetings with such a male-dominated presence. Eventually, I had to attend and run some site meetings on my own. And what I did was made sure I was very open and prepared for the meeting, making sure that if there was any questions that I had all the answers pre-prepared. This made me go in with more confidence, and in turn, I gained the respect of all the colleagues that were there, giving me the kickstart I kind of needed to bring the confidence to the construction site with all my colleagues. From there, experiencing as many fields of construction as possible also helped. I tried to get well-versed in plumbing, mechanical, electrical, and everything possible so that if there was a conversation that was being had, I felt like I could always contribute and find my way in, and I get to experience different aspects of construction. Thirdly, finding my niche. That really helped me find my role in construction as I began to come to the name of the Passive House expert in our particular projects. So if there was any questions about Passive House, all the tradespeople, the superintendents, fellow project managers would always come to me and ask me for advice and tips and approval and everything. So it really helped me step into a leadership role there in terms of taking the lead on the Passive House. So all of these 3 points have really helped me find my voice in construction, gaining respect of all tradespeople on site, forming relationships, and overall a great construction experience. So where does this leave us in the future? I believe my position as a project manager would be very beneficial with more women. There's a limited number of women I find on the job sites. and a larger amount on the design end. So having more women in the middle ground would help cross that bridge in many ways. It would create more diversity, new perspectives, new approaches to the problem solving on site, and a new experience for some of the tradespeople on site to have a woman in the main site leadership role. A quick example is we are doing a building for the YWCA right now. And they, out of the building we are building for them, which is a passive house, precast building, they are going to start running women trades courses through their building. So all the people that live in the building will be encouraged to take them, and hopefully helping encourage women to start entering into the trades, giving them that opportunity to break into the tradespeople. So that's just a little bit, next slide, about me and my experience, and I hope to have a great discussion further on in the summit about women in construction and where the future lies. Thank you.
Thanks, Josie. That was great. And now here's Beth Campbell.
Hi, that's me. There we go. My name is Beth Campbell. I work as a project manager for Unity Homes. I just started at Unity this past fall, so it's a relatively new position for me. And what I always say is that I kind of came into construction through the back door. I didn't come in through any type of formal education or training. Next slide. I came in through the mud on projects like this. So at the time I was working as a wildlife biologist for the National Park Service. And I started, when I was off season, I started volunteering and finding some fun projects in the cities I was living to help out. And I just was really interested in environmental construction. And this was the first place I found it. Next slide. So, I really got my start in the early 2000s working on little community projects like this playground feature that was made of earth and straw. Next slide. And as I kind of progressed, I thought it was pretty cool. I started working with some owner builders who were building their own natural buildings, like this straw bale that was in northern Wisconsin. Here I'm laying on an earthen floor, which is, as it sounds, made of straw, clay, and sand. And as I kept going, you can go to the next slide, please. I started, having a little more experience, was able to work on bigger and brighter projects. This was at the Madison Children's Museum in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I began to be more familiar with actual construction site protocols and what was going on. So again, without any formal construction, I was just sort of finding my own way, but able to work on some pretty neat projects like this one. Next slide. And as I progressed over, maybe 7-8 years, I gained a lot more carpentry experience. I started picking up some, little more traditional type carpentry projects. And at that time, I bought a property in Missouri and I needed a place to live. Next slide. So I built a house, and this was my first foray into high performance construction. I didn't know much about what I was doing. I had just heard of Passive House. Maybe I read one article about it. So I wrapped this little house in exterior insulation and air sealed it to the best of my ability. And my life eventually brought me to Portland, Oregon in 2015. Next slide. And Bird's Mouth Design Build took me on as a project manager. God bless them. I didn't have a ton of experience in really high performance construction or, high-end residential construction at that point, but I kind of just got my chops on the job site and I had a lot of good people. That was not one of the slides. But there were kids in this project, so maybe they had something to do with it. Next slide, please. There seems to be a small technical difficulty. Okay, Zach, I'm not quite sure what's going on. I didn't put that green scribble on these slides, but there we go. And working in Portland, I ended up working for another company as well, Green Hammer, which was likewise focused on high performance residential, mainly residential construction. This was a single family home that I just completed last fall. This was obviously not its complete state. This was during construction. You can keep going. Next slide, please. And so as I was working as a project manager, I was able to build more and more skill. Eventually, yeah, this was an accessory dwelling unit that I was working on as a project manager in Portland. And next slide, was eventually able to get into some of the commercial projects that Green Hammer was working on, such as this 12-unit townhome style at a retirement community that's there in Portland. And all of that is to say that, you know, working as a woman in Portland, Oregon, it was, you know, you'd think it would be a little bit easier, but it was often the case where I found myself the only woman on the job site. And I kind of make a joke sometimes that just showing up on the job site is my social justice work for the day. People are always asking how did I get into construction, or who am I there, you know, especially as a project manager, I'll be talking with different subcontractors and they're like, are you the interior designer? No, I'm the project manager. Or are you the architect? No, I actually am the project manager. Or are you the homeowner? No, actually I'm your boss on this job. So it's been an interesting journey for sure. And these projects have been great. Next slide. And now I find myself here in Keene, New Hampshire, working for Unity Homes, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bensonwood. And so both of these companies form a really strong collaboration. And this is a photo of our offsite fabrication facility where we are doing panelized construction, high performance panelized construction. So it's another new avenue for me to be learning about and pursuing, but it's been fantastic. Next slide. And these are some examples of the types of homes that Unity builds. There's 5 different platforms, so there's a standardization, and part of the goal is bringing high performance costs down in a single family residential setting to make it a little more affordable to the middle class. Next slide, I popped this one in here to give a shout out to one of my favorite organizations, Girls Builds, just to show you the future of women in construction. Here they are. And as you can see, the girl on the left, girls rule. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Beth. And now we're going to hear from Kat.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kat Campbell. I am an envelope specialist and carpenter with New Frameworks Natural Design Build. We operate out of Burlington and Central Vermont. Next slide. So a little bit about my backstory. I first got curious about building during my undergraduate years when I found out about earthships. I later on took an internship with them and decided that wasn't exactly the career path for me. Later on, followed my curiosity to a permaculture design course in Tennessee. And there I found myself more curious about the built environment and the earthen buildings on that site than I was about the farming that was happening. Next slide. So my instructor from my permaculture design course in Tennessee sent me up to Yestermorrow Design Build School in Waitsfield, Vermont. And I took a 7-week natural building certificate course there. And I would, during the course of that class, meet 5 employees of New Frameworks. At the time, I think they had only 8 employees. And my instructors, both in the Earthships experiences and at Yestermorrow, a lot of my instructors were women, and my fellow students as well. And not only the instructors, but people in positions of leadership, designers and project managers, co-owners. This was my first experience seeing myself reflected in this career in ways that made me feel like I could aspire to beyond just a laborer. So during my time at Yes Tomorrow, I became so enamored with the way that my instructors from New Frameworks were interacting together in collaborative and warm and caring ways that I became fairly hell-bent on getting a job with this company. So I went back to Tennessee after that and became obsessed. And I watched a video during that time, next slide, that was on the New Frameworks website, where one of the co-founders and one of my greatest role models, Ace McCarlton, says, "New Frameworks is a new way of working and thinking in the trades, where women and trans folk are welcome, where we talk about social justice issues and being a part of the deeper ecosystem as much as we think about getting the job done. The trades are so male dominated. Mentoring of women and trans folk is a part of our vision." And hearing somebody speak to me and say, "Hello, we would like you here. We would like you to have a safe, empowering environment for you to learn a new trade," brought tears to my eyes quite a few of the first times I watched that video. Next slide, please. So in the winter of 2018, I moved to Vermont and started working with New Frameworks on Burlington's first passive house. Sorry, previous slide. And at the time, I was the only woman on our job site. And I was more grateful than I anticipated at the Vermont winter and my excuse to bulk up and disguise my gender with bulky winter clothing. As winter faded and I was getting more comfortable on site, I was more prepared to handle the second looks and kind of general more eyes that were on me as a woman on the job site than some of my coworkers. Now, one of the jobs I worked on most recently often had 50% women on the job site, which was exciting and empowering, and just continually has me thinking, how do we not only hire more women, but how do we retain more women in our job sites? And it brings me to this discussion of equity versus equality. Next slide. And this graphic is kind of the perfect example of that, of the same people given the same resources may not necessarily have access to the same outcomes. And how do we acknowledge that for not only women, but other marginalized people on our job sites? How do we ensure that people are able to succeed as equally as their coworkers and as their peers? Next slide. So where does equity show up in the trades? Entry-level good work. I've seen a lot of job postings that seem like entry-level work that still caption that they would like experience preferred. And most of the people who have experience in my conversations are my male coworkers, other male tradespeople I know who started working in the trades before they were 18. Where else does equity show up? Equity shows up in a one-size-fits-all construction site. So the body that I think of when I think of a body on a construction site is 6 foot tall, muscular, and male. And that is the size that I see reflected in the equipment and the workwear and just the general size of things that I find at my local hardware store. Size large, size extra large. Equity shows up in setting up safety for all sizes and ability levels on a job site, acknowledging that not everybody will have the same success given the same resources for safety. And equity shows up in occupational segregation. So where do women work versus where do men work? What is their potential for pay raise within that job description? What is their potential for professional development? Are women capping out in pay and professional development before men in their typical avenues? Equity shows up in bathroom facilities on site. It seems like a really simple thing that would benefit all people at all times, but I've heard stories from a lot of women about showing up on job sites where there was not a single bathroom facility, let alone a facility for women. And lastly, my last point anyways, is equity shows up in the conversations we have on site. So I have not heard very many of my coworkers be called sweetheart by strangers on site. And I don't know if they have the same experiences that I have when a stranger at a lumberyard makes a sexual innuendo about the construction materials that I am purchasing. But a certain number of these experiences speak louder to women that this is not a space that was created for us. But I think that it is a space that was created for us. And the statistics that Ilka was showing earlier, and just in my experience of a more diverse job site, we have more resilience, more adaptability, and more innovation, the more diverse the brains on our crew are. And I think we need more women. Thanks to Passive House Accelerator and to Mary for putting this on. And thank you for listening.
Okay, and I just want to comment that there's a lot of chat going on about more diversity in construction and why aren't there women of color on the panel, and that's my responsibility. And I think the panelists are great, and I have to admit that I had this reaction when I saw all the panelists gathered, and they're all great. And I'm looking forward to hearing everybody else's presentation. And Ingrid, let's talk about it more after the presentations are done. So Anna, you're up.
Okay. Thank you for having me. My name's Anna Heath. I work for Maine Passive House, which is in the western foothills of Maine. I started there 3 or 4 years ago in 2017, and I came directly out of college. Next slide, please. So I kind of came to construction in a very long and windy way, and I often reference back to experiences with living and studying in New York City and the architecture around me, and my engineering background, and moving to Korea for a summer and studying under a company that was trying to provide a building case for green buildings to the wealthiest people, the wealthiest real estate developers in this city, the entire city of Seoul. But I think truthfully, the most honest answer is my grandfather. He's pictured there in the middle. He was a carpenter. His father started a company called N. Marini and Sons, of all things, and passed it down to him, who then passed it on to my uncle, and he's still running this business. One day it's my dream to bring it to Maine and call it N. Marini and Daughters, but until then, I just remember fondly the smell of his workshop and how organized it was. I can't believe it. And getting a set of his chisels that I get to work with. The quote at the bottom is a note that we found after he passed away that he had written on so many small pieces of paper. And I still to this day can't quite fully figure out what it means, but I definitely think I live by it. I think there's some busyness in my soul. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I first started at Maine Passive House, it was a winter build, and it was snowy and icy, and we were chipping ice off the foundation so we can put our framing up, and it was unlike anything I could have ever imagined. It wasn't. I don't know what I expected when I showed up, but it was hard work and it was physical, and every single day seeing the house change in front of me I had no idea what angles we were working with, and this property was this amazing structure that sort of fit into a tiny little property with all of these setbacks and limitations due to water frontage and neighbors and all this stuff. And imagining, building a house for my very first time, I've got the like perfect square little box with a nice single pitch, and I ended up building this, which was beyond what I could have expected. And I think one of the interesting and compelling things about joining a passive house construction crew is that even though I was brand new and I had just learned to read a tape measure and was just starting to understand the language of construction, I could be useful. There's so much membraning, and there's so much taping, and there's so much minutia and attention to detail in the air barriers on these structures that it gave me an opportunity to feel important when I first started out. And I do want to say, coming into this field, coming into the trades, it's like walking right into a wall. I mean, you have to learn so many different terms that are used in ways you're not expecting. I'm thinking specifically of like plumb and flush. I always thought about toilets when people use those terms, and so many other things like this. And my feedback the first year I was there was from my boss in the annual review was ask more questions. And I remember just thinking to myself, I don't even know what questions to ask. I don't even know when to ask these questions. So I definitely want to add a little bit of encouragement out there to people starting out in the trades that it's just going to be wild. The first time you walk onto that job site is going to be brand new, but there's so much tangible evidence of the work that you've done. It can be a very, very satisfying job if your mind works that way. Next slide, please. So the time that I spent learning over the last 3 or 4 years, we actually hired another woman, and she gave me some of the greatest wisdom I think that was passed on from one of her supervisors. I can fix any mistake that I make. And I think it speaks to so many different things, the confidence that you need to develop, that Josie was actually speaking about, to find your voice there and to start to understand so many facets of construction, to be able to stand up to subcontractors, because that's where I got the most flack. Be able to hold my own, be able to have a conversation with them, be able to push them back when they're asking too much or providing too little, or being inappropriate. I definitely had experiences with that as well. But overall, I think my experience coming into the trades and the support that I got from my boss and the crew that I work with was very, very wonderful. And I feel very fortunate about that. Next slide, please. So through my community, I actually became connected with the Center for Ecology-Based Economy. And it's this really awesome organization that connects people doing really cool stuff all over the state of Maine to build more resilient communities. And these are a few examples of the projects that I've run as a shelter working group board steward for the organization. And they empower this organization just empowers the community to come together. We built a little free pantry, which was a collaboration between our food and our shelter working group. And we built a greenhouse with people from so many different ages. And we have window inserts to help insulate windows, and they're available to people with so many different income levels. And it's all built by volunteers, which empowers the community to work on their own projects. Next slide, please. But the project that's really near and dear to my heart is a project called We Built This. Myself, the other woman at Maine Passive House, Katrina, my mother, and 2 other women in our community that are engaged with CB and have built their own houses. We all ran this workshop last fall, and it was so much fun. There were 16 women. We built things, we learned things, we broke things, and coming together like that carefully, because it was during the pandemic. But I think that also kind of just magnified how wonderful it was to be together and to be creating together. It was fantastic. And so we're hoping to run a few more of these in the coming years and address a bunch of different communities that don't have representation in the trades. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Anna. And now it's MC.
Hello. Thanks to everyone for hosting this panel. I'm really excited to be here. My name is MC MacPhee. I am currently living in Toronto. I'll start out just by telling you about how I got into carpentry. So in my mid-20s or so, I was doing my undergrad at university, and I spent my summers working as a landscaper. So in that job as a landscaper, everyone I worked for was like, oh, you're building me this garden, that's great. You know, can you build me a fence? Can you fix my deck? Can you build me a shed? Just all these questions at every single job. And I had no idea how to build anything. I had never used a tool. I had no experience with tools, really. You know, I could make it up, but I didn't actually know what I was doing. But I knew kind of through those questions that I was like, okay, I love landscaping and I want to be able to build these things. So I knew that was the direction I wanted to move into. So I finished my degree, and then I applied to a college, and I did a 2-year construction program that had a particular focus on sustainable construction methods, which was really great. And I sort of knew that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just work in the kind of conventional industry. I wanted to focus on sustainability. So after I graduated, I sort of went in and out a bit of carpentry work. I had all these other like skills that I'd developed in university. And so I kept getting pulled into this kind of like administrative role. So even in construction, I'd be working for a construction company, and, you know, they needed an employee manual or they needed health and safety. And so I was always kind of doing that on the side. But eventually I was like, okay, enough of this stuff. Like, I really want to be building. And, you know, like Anna said, there's so much information to know. And when you're new, you're just like, oh, where do I start? So I just was like, I'm registering for my apprenticeship. I'm doing my hours. I'm gonna figure out how to do this well. So I did that, and it was wonderful. And so I've been in the industry for probably 10 or 12 years. I've worked mostly with sustainable renovation companies. I've worked a bit in film and TV, which is not remotely sustainable, but is very interesting. And I've worked just on the note of passive homes. Recently, I was working with the Fourth Pig and Took Tree, and they build prefab passive houses up here in just north of Toronto, actually. So a few years ago, maybe more than that now, I don't know, but I had a work injury. And so I thought, okay, you know, I got a bit freaked out, and I thought I should do my Bachelor of Education. I should just like get my teaching degree so that I can, you know, I can just kind of have this like backup plan for when I'm old and my body breaks down and I just can't do this anymore. And so I did it, and it was great. And then I just kind of got into teaching. And so since then I've been teaching a lot in high schools, in colleges, and then also with the Endeavour Centre. So for those who don't know, the Endeavour Centre is in Peterborough, Ontario. It's just an hour and a half or so outside of Toronto. Endeavour is an independent and sustainable building school with a particular focus on experiential education. And all of Endeavour's projects and teaching are sort of at this intersection of like high performance and natural building. So that's the bulk of what we do there through our longer programs and through our workshops. And so in normal sort of non-COVID times, we run a number of 2-day carpentry skills for women workshops. And every summer we run an 8-day construction skills for women workshop, which there's always sort of a client who wants a shed, and we go in for 8 days and kind of teach, you know, from the bottom up, and we finish the shed in those 8 days. And it's so much fun. It's just ridiculously fun. I've also been teaching some carpentry skills for women workshops at a college up here, Georgian College, that I work at as well. So in my experience, these workshops just like sell out immediately. Like there's the waiting list is huge. There's so many people who are interested. And from what I've learned, it seems that these women really want a place where they can just be totally comfortable, like being a beginner. They can ask so many questions, and they can, be in an environment where they hope, and, I hope to deliver this, that, they're not being judged, they're not being rushed, and they just don't sort of have that feeling that they're not quite good enough. So many of these women who I speak to in these workshops feel like, they sort of, in many cases, weren't invited into the trades younger. So as kids, they weren't invited in to help with like home repairs, or with things like even mowing the lawn, like just things that give you sort of basic comfort with tools or machinery. And so they have this feeling that like they were left out, like they were left out of the secret, and there's this like secret that they just don't know. And as soon as we get into it, a day into it, they're just like, oh my God, I got this, like, yes, there's tons to know, but like, it's not that hard. And my mom's like, yeah, it's like, you just need to learn how to use these tools and sort of get comfortable with them. And then you can just keep developing your skills. And so it's always an amazing experience, I think, for me to be sort of helping people just recognize, like, just sort of demystify this fear and this feeling that they can't do it. So that's one of the things I love best about teaching those kinds of workshops. And another thing I think I really love, so I've had in the last few years, I've definitely had tons of different teaching experiences. Yeah, and I think for me, it feels really important. Like, I'm a queer woman and I'm teaching, in many cases they're women to build, which is awesome. But for the most part, if I'm teaching at a college, my class is like 25, 18-year-old boys. And it feels really important to me to be sort of normalizing the role of women in leadership positions in the construction trade. In that position, you sort of get to set the stage, you get to set the tone, you get to define, like, ideally sort of like with your students or your crew, sort of what that culture is going to be in your classroom or on your job site. So you can have these hard conversations about language, about respect, about sort of what's okay and what's not. And you can hopefully sort of help to inform like a long-term sort of positive vision of what the trades could look like. Because I think we can all agree, like, there's a lot of work left to be done in the trades before it's a place that's actually really welcoming. And I think we just need, as everyone's been saying, like, we need more women in leadership positions, but we need more women, we need more marginalized folks, we need more people of color, women of color, queers, trans folks. We need these people to sort of be in the trades generally and be comfortable and like supported and encouraged. And we also need, if folks are willing and wanting to sort of be moving into, lead carpenter, site supervisor, project manager, teachers, instructors, to really just, set that stage and work to diversify the trades. And I think, for me as an instructor, that's what I really try to do, I'm always trying to sort of push through the Endeavour Center and through other places to kind of transform the industry. So it's a place where, where everyone actually feels welcomed, supported, where people are having like good work, they're making a good wage, they're happy in their job, they feel supported in their job. If they want to move into leadership positions, like, that's an opportunity that's there for them. And I always try to prioritize working with people who, are defining sustainable construction in a way where that sustainability is prioritizing social justice. So we're sort of, working on sites or developing classrooms that just have like zero tolerance for racism, for sexism, for homophobia, for sort of anything that's going to make people feel unwelcome and unsupported. And so that's, as an instructor, something that I really try hard to do. And I feel like I'm hearing more and more of that from people who want the trades to be sort of moving in that direction. And so it's, it feels like an exciting time for me. And it feels extra exciting to be able to, help and encourage more women and just more folks broadly to sort of get into the trades. So that's it.
Okay, great. Thanks, MC. And now we have Deborah joining us. And after that, we'll go to Q&A.
Sorry, technical difficulty trying to unmute there. Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Fields. I'm the operations manager for Cascade Built. We're a general contractor in Washington State. Construction in general, but especially the topic of, she who constructs, is something that's very important to me. It's so much so that for probably about 28 years or so, my email address has been, maybe 22 years, sorry about that, has been Lady Builder. So it's, it's just something that has always been really important to me. Next slide. So Cascade Built is a leader in passive house construction. We do buildings of the future right now. Solace, pictured here, is a 45 unit construction project, passive house multifamily construction that we just finished over the summer. And the mural, I just had to show you guys the mural. It's the talk of the town. The owner of the building brought someone in from Ireland to paint that, and I just think it's beautiful. And the building is also a recent award winner. Previously to Solace, our project called Pax Futura held the title as the largest at 35 units. Next slide. LE Passive House is soon will take over the largest multifamily passive house in Washington at 66 units when it's completed in about a month. It's going to be a beautiful one too. And I heard that they're going to also try to do a mural on the side of their building. So we'll have dueling murals in Seattle on the side of these passive house buildings. Next slide. So I started my career about 30 years ago. I started in marketing. I was selected, or I was asked to come work at a electrical subcontracting firm because I knew a specific software that would allow us to do our bid packages in-house. We wouldn't have to send them out and get them printed and bound. So I went to work and did that. And I instantly fell in love with, it was like a 1,000,000-piece puzzle, and I got to help be a part of putting it together, even though my role at that time was just the initial putting the package together, selecting pictures and, the text and making our bid look good. But over time, I got more involved, did different roles. The next thing you know, I was working in the field and I became a superintendent. I was I was slated to be a superintendent on a house for Bob Vila. It wasn't called Passive House. It was an energy-wise house, but it had a lot of the same characteristics of Passive House, which I think is interesting that 17 years later, I'm back to energy-wise and energy efficiency. But I was slated to be the superintendent on this house with Bob Vila, and I enrolled in the Home Builders Association Superintendent School. And the year was 2003. And it wasn't really that long ago, but I was the only woman in attendance. And I won't lie, it was tough. It was tough being, there for a week with a group of men and being the only woman, but I did it and I graduated, and I think it made an impact not only on me and my career, but just for the record, I have 4 boys, 3 of whom saw me as, a woman, as a lead role in construction. And 3 of my sons have followed me into construction, which I think is good, good for all of us. But, I'm thrilled that I'm no longer the only woman in the room. My current company is 33% women, and I know that we're not going to stop there. We're going to keep going, and we're going to do more. Next slide. I have grown both personally and professionally in the industry. I've spent time in nearly every position that makes up a successful company. I'm the operations manager, which is a cross between a project manager and a compliance manager, but for all the projects and all the people. So there's a lot going on. It's very busy. It's very challenging, but it's extremely rewarding. And I have the opportunity to work with some of the best and brightest people in the industry, including a current project engineer. She is making her way to project manager at warp speed, and I'm honored to be a part of her, shall we say, race to the finish. So a part of her path in this industry. So that's been great. And I do see change, and I do see acceptance, and it's small and sometimes slow, but it does exist. And next slide. And in closing, I just want to remind everyone that the best thing that we can do is support each other and celebrate each other. I encourage everyone to not only get a mentor, but be a mentor. And most importantly, watch out for the up and comers, my amazing granddaughters, by the way. And hopefully they will enter this business with open arms and acceptance. And thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Really appreciate all the speakers, and now we're going into the Q&A session. And I think Ingrid, you've been wanting to talk, so do you want to take the stage?
I can try. I really, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for doing this. And I want to say thank you to all the people who spoke. I appreciate your experience, your life experience, your energy in sharing your knowledge and what's happened for you in your career trajectories. This is not, I am not coming from a hateful place. I'm coming from a place where intersectionality is generally overlooked still. So there are women who are Latinas, and there are women who are Asian, and there are women who are in wheelchairs, and there are lots of different women that are less than the white women who are on construction sites, work for construction companies. It's invariably a smaller number. We get paid invariably less. And yet, and this is, somebody has to be responsible. So at the end of the day, of course, there is some finger pointing going on, but this still happens. Panels of all white men or all white women still happens. And that's why we're here. I mean, I feel like it's great to say, hold others accountable. And yet people who are speaking are not holding the person who puts together, the moderator or whoever puts together the panel, they're not holding anybody accountable by saying, okay, so who else is on the panel? You know what? I would like to recommend Sangeeta. I would like to recommend Daniela. I would like to, or recruiting. I mean, I'm not sure how, well, I do know, but I don't want to throw too many assumptions out there, but I don't know how it is that folks are not recruiting heavily. I come from a sport background. Like I played a lot of soccer at University of Waterloo outside of Toronto and Howard University. I played varsity soccer at both colleges, right? And so it's like you recruit the best to be on your team. This isn't high school where nobody gets kicked off the thing. You know, it's like you sometimes some people don't get picked, but you recruit heavily. That's what they do in football, right? Is they go to people's homes and they show what they might look like in their jersey and stuff. Recruit and recommend people who don't look like you. Now, obviously, in my position, it's people who actually do look like me. But yeah, there's this little thing on the interweb called Google. If you don't know what to do, I don't make the assumption that you don't have Black friends, because we're like a ton of fun. Like we're really fun. But like if you're not sure, like ask somebody. It's okay. I feel it's okay. Look, I'm a former world record holder in an Aboriginal game. I speak French, and I have a close friend who was the captain in Canada of wheelchair basketball. So it's okay to say, hey, I don't know anything about that. Can you teach me? Can you show me? There's nothing horrible about saying, I don't know, but I would like to learn about your culture, about your tribe, about your language. It's okay. But we are seriously lacking diversity. And everybody deserves a wonderful house that does not make them sick, that does not hurt them. Everybody deserves that. Why? I don't know how many Black folks are on this call, but why is there 200 white people? Like, there's something like, am I the only person who's like, anyway, that's all I have. I'm sorry. Red herring. Okay, bye.
Ingrid, we really appreciate your comments. And, I wish that I had done more work to do more outreach, and that's on me. It's my responsibility. And, I hope that we do better the next time, but I really do appreciate your comments, and I'd love to hear from other people too.
Yeah, it looks like we also have a question from Daniela about how diversity is being talked about in different people's construction companies. Daniela, do you want to come ask your question?
Sure. I'll just read what I wrote. I just wanted to talk about how this week my company started an equity committee to talk about the things that we've learned over the past year as BLM has become in the forefront of everyone's minds, and every company has sort of started to talk about it. So I'm just wondering what everyone else's companies is doing to talk about the lack of diversity in their own companies and in the industry.
Sure. I'm just jumping in here. I'm the one who's talking about the union. So a lot of our job sites have a 20% women and people of color quota, and that's in Massachusetts specifically, and that's only on public jobs. And we're trying to push the local schools here to also take on that quota. And I've been on job sites where there's women electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and we also heavily recruit specifically people of color, veterans. And for me personally, I came from a different background and I didn't really know about trade unions, and I've been in for 4 years, and I do think that the independent contractor world should definitely support unions because they've been statistically doing the best job at retaining people of color and women, and that's part of why I'm so proud to be a union member. I know that there's a lot of things that both worlds need to meet together in terms of sustainability, meeting the union side of things, which is more commercial, blah, blah, blah. I've already made my point in the chat, but take it on somebody else.
So something I've been really excited to see this year is that this conversation is happening more. And at least in the avenues that I've been exposed to, I'm seeing it happen at a higher level, at a more organizational level. So my company, some of us attended Better Buildings by Design. It's a conference based out of Burlington, virtual conference this year. And they hosted, and some of my coworkers spoke during a panel about anti-racism in the trades. And then another conference and organization, NESI, Northeast Sustainable Energy Association, maybe about a month or two ago, hosted an anti-racism training, and my company made that available to us at no cost to us personally. So these things are starting to become conversations that are happening out there in a great way that we can support our coworkers and our marginalized friends, is to support each other in attending these things. So if you can afford to send people in your company to attend trainings like this, to start to have access to how to talk about this, because not talking about it isn't helping anybody. So just expressing that the conversation is happening and it's happening higher up and it's growing slower than it needs to, but it's happening.
Hello, sorry to be late to the meeting here. This is Michael Cornigan. As you can see, and probably from my voice, I'm not a woman, but I am a man of color. And the one thing I would simply say is this, and Ingrid, well stated. But the one thing I would say is that there is, I don't know how many people are familiar with the term micro inequities. Not micro inequities. Yeah, maybe there's micro inequities, but it's a way that you see the world. And you see the world through the prism of your own life. And if you don't examine yourself, you tend to look at the world differently. I'm a man of color who grew up in the inner city in Brooklyn, and I see the world. And so when I see a kid walking down the street, a young man walking down the street with maybe dreadlocks and hair, or something, I may see him differently than one of my white counterparts would see him. So all I'm saying is simply this. Likewise, if I see a young man walking with long hair and a heavy metal shirt on, I may see him differently. So I guess it's nothing big, guys. It's just something to be deliberate about what you do. Those of you who know me know I have a passion for recruiting women, particularly women of color, into the engineering field. Fortunately, my daughter is going to follow my footsteps, going to engineering, because there's just not a lot of women in engineering, particularly in engineering, women of color. So I think what happens is it doesn't require a big plan. It just requires, say, let me be deliberate about this. Let me find someone that I can recruit, someone that I can talk to, that I can develop. And it's really one step at a time. And you'd be surprised, because there was a Jewish young lady, she's young, but Jewish guidance counselor who saw something in me, who said, Mike, I'm going to pull you aside. And I'm going to work with you. And had she never done that, I don't know where I'd be today. So, so we have to give back, and that's all I'm saying. And I just, it's not big step. It's just these little small steps that will make a difference in the world. And that was my 2 cents there, guys. But great conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael. We also have another question from Amelia. Do you want to come ask your question, Amelia?
My last question was, how can companies be anti-racist if they're not hiring people of color? And like I said, I think it's a choice for companies to take on a mandate of, we do want to have 20% women on this job, and maybe they get to 10%, but I think that it has to be intentional, as Ingrid said, deliberate, as Ingrid said, I'm sorry, because of the way that our economic system works. It's not just going to happen. You're not just going to have Black and brown people and people from poverty coming and applying to these companies, because they might not be recruited for them, and they might not have the training, and they might not have the outreach. So it's also coming down to having a good system of support, where you're saying, okay, we have these health benefits, we have a workers' comp, we have a pension, you can file for unemployment. Like, these are the things that the union supports you in. And we have also a sisters meeting, which is specifically about women in the trades, because it's a difficult place to navigate when you're first joining. And I found the non-union world, everyone has good intentions, but when it comes down to numbers, it just doesn't exist. And I think that really needs to change. And I'm glad that it seems like everybody on this call is like, all right, let's do it. But that means putting numbers and putting data to it. There's the policy group for tradeswomen that's out of Boston, and they've been trying to get the 20% of women in the trades by 2020. I don't know if we've made it in some of the trades, we might have. But yeah, that's my whole question and answer.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing the policy group for tradeswomen out of Boston. That's going to be really great to look into. We have a policy summit coming up next month, so we will be looking into that. The next question is also from Ingrid, and you mentioned in the chat, Ingrid, asking how can a single mother afford to own a passive house? Do you want to come and talk about that?
Sure. When I think of wanting to build a house that's based on passive house principles. And I say that just because I'm not, I don't want to get tied up in the different passive house organizations and certifications and all that there is. But when I think about that, I think about the problem solving that has to happen to be relevant to people who need to live in a home that supports them. And so that might be by bridging a gap. And that might be looking at, okay, so how can we build a duplex with a really small footprint? Because this is going to get expensive no matter how hard we try. It's going to be expensive, but it has to generate some income so that this woman can afford this. Or how can we set up a fund to pay the opening and closing costs? Or what cities do we need to look at so that we start with some basic low costs? For example, here in Detroit, there is a program with the Detroit Land Bank Authority, which owns 90,000 properties. 90,000 parts. They're going to be at this for a while, people. But they have a program where if you are a homeowner and there is a land bank parcel within 500 feet of you, you can get that parcel no matter what size. Well, it has to be under an acre. Okay, it's not no matter what size, but a large parcel for $250. That's a great fund. But if to start and say, okay, hey, access. You're a single mother. You don't have $250. She really might not. Let me put that in a fund and I don't know. So that's how renters become homeowners of passive houses is you start somewhere where the basics, like just getting some land, owning some. We did not get our 40 acres and a mule. I just want to point that out. Whether it's a fund or come to Detroit but Baltimore, but Detroit, I mean, Los Angeles, Miami, there are some places where people who need access cannot, you like to build a passive house. Somebody said $450 per square foot is what she built a passive. I was like, okay, granted that was at the higher end, but still, like that is not affordable. But we deserve that. This is what Black Lives Matter looks like in the construction industry. We do matter. We do have value. We do want to live someplace that is safe and awesome and way above the building code. How do we do that? One way is to put energy towards places that are cheaper for some really good, well, not bad reasons, but they just are. 1.8 million people used to live in Detroit, and now we have 660,000, and it continues to fall. This place is cheap. It can be a hub, but this isn't the only place that's inexpensive. So I don't know. Single mothers need some help. Passive house principles has some answers for them. They deserve this. They don't know y'all exist. They deserve it too.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Ingrid. I think that's such a great point. I'm going to put in the chat a link to our talk we had a few weeks ago with Dennis Wedlick about the rural building initiatives, but I think that there's a lot of great information in that we can continue to utilize as we try to mobilize making passive house more accessible for mothers of color in particular. We had another question from Taylor Mann. Taylor, would you like to come ask your question?
Hi, everyone. First off, I just want to say this is an amazing discussion, and I'm really happy to be here and just thankful to each of you who have made this an opportunity for us to participate in. My question was, as a licensed real estate broker in Boulder, Colorado, how can I support women BIPOC in the real estate industry and the passive house movement in construction right now. For those of you who do not know, Denver, which is a neighboring city here, just released its net zero energy new buildings and homes implementation plan, and basically we plan to achieve net zero energy in all new buildings by 2030 with net zero energy in all electric homes required by 2024. So that's my question and I'm all ears. Basically, I'm really tired of seeing just double paned windows as the only listed energy feature in the MLS.
Well, I see Shannon put a great response to that, get the HERS ratings or any sort of energy ratings listed on the MLS. And I think there are some programs there are some jurisdictions that have required that. I'm not, I don't know if anybody here knows which jurisdictions, but
I know
they do.
Portland, Oregon is one of them.
I think Minneapolis had energy audits as a requirement for your package as well.
Taylor, I'm in Denver too, and I'm in Fort Collins right now, but work in Denver, and agreed it's not on any of the MLS listings. It's an issue. I presented on Passive House at a realtors conference a couple of years ago in Denver, and it's shocking what's on the MLS listings. And so we can talk offline afterwards about where we would go to do that. But as everyone's saying, I think it's because it's a decentralized kind of a thing, it's hard to get those features, recognized from the realtor side of things as well. And I think they're, one of the things that we talk about in training sometime is kind of this gadget culture we have, and that can actually be leveraged to the advantage in real estate a little bit more. If I, for example, were going to go look for a house right now, I would want to know what the ACH score on it was. That's not listed anywhere. How do realtors take these kind of features of passive and, sell the windows like you would, granite countertop, or, know your window type. What kind of window is that? Is it, something impressive or not? Do you know anything about the frame? Do you know what's going on with the HVAC system? Is there a really cool Zender ERV in there? How to make these things a little bit sexier to sell and to make valuable in the eyes of the purchasers. And I don't know which comes first, getting that on the MLS listing or making that look valuable to the customers, but it's a bit chicken and egg. It's got to happen at the same time probably. So it's good that you're here.
Great stuff. Thank you. I'd love to connect with you offline.
We also had a question from Laura about taking hiatus from work. Laura, would you like to come ask your question?
I was just saying, sorry. I was just saying that, there's a treasure trove of talent and skill in women returning to the workforce after having, taken a hiatus to raise their kids. And these women are generally undervalued, and they have a hard time re-entering the workplace. So sort of a stepped, what I used is a stepped situation where we start out at a rate, and every month or two it gets raised. The hourly rate gets raised as they begin to retrain, and so that there's a transition that lets them build while they're re-entering the workforce and trying to remind themselves, in architecture anyway, how to do AutoCAD and whatnot, but in whatever field they are. So having sort of a method for allowing people to enter into the market and not be 6 months later, but a month later, you get another $1. And month after that, you get another $1 on your hourly rate or whatever it is, but that it's rapid and it's responsive to people's effort to retrain.
Laura, this is Beth Campbell speaking. I appreciate you bringing that up, and it just is reminding me of, I don't exactly have an answer to, women reentering the workforce after having children, but it makes me think a lot about some of the tradeswomen's organizations that are scattered around North America that help women who want to pursue a career in construction, and maybe they don't know anything about construction, or they just don't have a particular skill. They maybe want to get into the unions. And like what Amelia was speaking of, that there's a lot of good protections in the unions when you're a woman coming into the trades. And, one of the reasons I feel so passionate about supporting women coming into the construction field is, it can be such a good income, especially for those who either cannot afford to go to college or choose not to go to college for some reason. So many people, so many women will get tracked into the service industry, and I really just fully believe that construction can be such a good place for women to come in and make a really solid living wage, or even above. And so, for those of us who have been involved either peripherally or directly through the women in the trades organizations, I think that those can be of huge benefit to giving women the confidence and the beginning of the exposure that they need to feel confident to work in such a male dominated situation. I don't know if there are other people on this call who have had experiences with those types of trades organizations that might just want to say something about their experience there.
I just want to comment that my experience is a lot of the men who are in construction have ADHD or learning disability or whatever, but they're smart, and they're physical, and there's a lot of women just like, right, that to going and sitting in front of a computer and doing certain kind of work is just not for them, but they aren't given the same credence, and or it doesn't have, it's not a natural path. It's not been made a natural path for them when it is a logical path for them as well.
I would like to say something to the fact that there are organizations out there that do help women get back on track after taking a leave of absence, once you have a kid. I live in Santa Fe. I've been, in the field of architecture for the last 20 some years. And I had a kid about 12 years ago, and that happened to coincide with the last housing bust that we had. And I kind of took that opportunity as, saying that, okay, I'm raising a kid now. But then afterwards, when I did want to come back into the profession, it was very challenging, because by then, the software that we were using had changed, so many things had changed just in 3, 4, 5 years. So I have to give credit to our local workforce solutions team and it's at the state level in New Mexico. They actually help people, gain more certifications, and they give you the money to go attend the university, go, get, further certification so that you can further your career. And they sent me to get my professional project management certification. It was a 32-hour thing. It's very challenging, with having little kids and trying to go back to school. It's super challenging. I pushed through it. It took about 15 months or so for me to do it, to get that 32-hour certification, because I was working full-time as well. But it was so helpful that somebody else was paying for it. And I did not really have to, skip out on work and take classes to do that. And that helped me a great deal. But without that program at the state level, I probably would not have been able to be in that position and slide right back into the career. And so many people don't know about these programs. I think like a lot of like larger employers need to take the initiative to let people know that, yeah, there are programs out there that can help you educate yourself and get back on track, or even like taking, like, say, Revit certification. Like if you don't know the software, if you've skipped out for 3, 4, 5 years, there needs to be more education about that. The sources are out there. I think the resources are out there, but we just don't know it, and it helps you tremendously to get back on track.
Great, thank you, everyone. It looks like we also have a question from Jessica. It was asked a little bit ago. It's been going off in chat, so maybe you want to come bring it to everybody, Jessica?
Oh, thank you, Sydney. Sorry. I think I asked a couple of questions on the chat. The most recent one I think was, so just a little bit of context. I'm a partner at a sustainable housing group in Miami, Florida, and we're trying to kind of tackle the challenge of making affordable housing and using passive standards. And financially and politically, it's a challenge, but we're making some strides. So I was just wondering if there are other people on the call or in the group, or even maybe discussions maybe I missed that really solely talk about affordable housing and passive. Thank you.
Well, Green Building United, which Laura Blau is involved in, they do a conference every year, New Gravity Housing, focused on affordable housing and high performance affordable housing. Laura, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Hi.
You want to talk about the conference a little bit?
What was the question?
The New Gravity Housing Conference, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, so Green Building United, which now has umbrellas our passive house community here in the Delaware Valley. We have been running a conference every year called New Gravity. Tim McDonald and Dave Solomon were some of the founders of that. It's focused on affordable housing, passive house and affordable housing. Last year we partnered with Chicago, and it ended up, of course, being a virtual conference. So we had to rapidly change. And I think this year it will also be virtual, since we don't know yet what the COVID issue will be, situation will be. But it'll be in person again. And we've been talking about trying to find other cities to partner with. So I'm not exactly sure, because I'm not directly on that committee working on that. But I know it's been an extremely successful conference dealing with affordable housing. And Pennsylvania is the first state, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Association, to put passive house in their mix of incentives. So if you were doing a passive house, you got a number of points towards your application for subsidies. And that has been really broke open the passive house situation here in the state of Pennsylvania. If other people can get their state affordable housing to include passive house as part of their incentive program, it's just amazing how it changes. People don't even know what it is, but they want to go do it because they're going to get X number of points. So that was a great lesson. And that was Tim McDonald and Laura Nettleson's brainchild. And they were the ones that advocated to the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Association and got that through.
Thank you so much, Flora. Really appreciate, and I will definitely check out. It seems really interesting, New Gravity. Could not agree more. The state of Florida is probably one of the last, I mean, I'm born and raised in Miami, but one of the last places that's politically inclined to add incentives for affordable housing developers to, have some sort of passive house standard. But we're definitely talking about it on a local level. So I will definitely check that out and link up with you. Thank you.
Hey, and Jessica, I just say I'm always looking for examples of projects to feature in hot and humid climates, because they're always challenging and there aren't that many examples to look to. Whereas if you're building in the north and cold climates, there's a lot more examples. So I'd love to talk with you further about that.
Definitely, Mary. I would love that as well.
Looks like we had a question from Samina about how we will work with low-income communities. Samina, do you want to come ask your question?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I just a couple of comments. I mean, I feel like, I'm just starting to design projects, and I'm trying to, as I said in my comments, trying to exceed the code definitely and build to passive house principles. But I just find, as there were several comments in the chat as well, agreeing that the certification process is just cost prohibitive, even for clients that are able to pay for these, higher performance standards, just in the means and methods and materials. And I think I also just feel like the passive house certification process, especially in FIAS, the US Institute, does not make any difference in the standards for the actual metrics that you have to pass for a retrofit. So if you have, wood frame building, it's quite possible to retrofit it quite completely to, to a passive house standard, because you're not looking at your cladding is not your structure. But the fact remains that we have a lot of masonry buildings that require a different approach, and it's just going to be very hard, especially with the space constraints of smaller homes, to actually make these metrics. And it's just, to me, I find it incredibly disappointing and challenging to think about that. And then when you start to introduce the idea of affordability in it, it seems to just become laughable. So, where I'm seeing the majority of affordable housing discussions go these days is, addressing a very critical issue of the housing crisis. I mean, we need more housing units, so multifamily housing becomes where that scale and also the form factor of the building is gonna work positively. But I think that there's a lot of buildings that are going to contribute to our 2-degree global warming situation that we're in. And I feel very frustrated that, for those of us who are trying to work to both do the marketing, which at the end of the day, the certification process is a marketing situation, right? Like, you put a plaque up at the end of this whole rigorous process. I feel like Passive House Institute has made a different approach where, I know that it's not climate differentiated, but they have a different standard for retrofit. But, where does that leave us for all the people who pursued Passive House certification as CPHCs to go with that? I mean, it's just, I find it incredibly, I find that the Institute seems to be very focused on the bigger picture, long horizon goals of, they just premiered their 2021 standard last week. And, you know, it's like they're trying to make it easier for like a single family home to basically not do a woofy model, but I'm just not seeing that much in like, how do you make this more attainable? Like, can we put different levels to it? Can we acknowledge that, you know, in a masonry home, you're just not going to, maybe 20 feet wide, you're just not going to be able to put, and it might not be actually like advisable if we're not baking our buildings dry, we might not want to put like, you know, 8 inches of insulation on the inside and reduce our width from, you know, 20 to 17 feet, right? So I feel like all of these concerns of like, you know, what Ingrid was saying about, you know, how does a single woman, a single mother afford a home, you know, like we're dealing with existing buildings. It's not all going to be raise and build new buildings, even with all the financing and credits and everything else. So I am just raising a point of frustration and just feeling like, you know, for me, I'm just like, I know all the passive house principles and I'm trying to, you know, convince clients on a piece by piece basis to get, you know, to purchase triple pane insulation, to do air barriers, to do exterior insulation. That's a big enough fight for people who have the money to spend and can get financing. You know, I just don't know how it's going to go when I try to do the work that I really want to do, which is make a difference.
Just out of curiosity, Samina, where are you working in? What area?
So I'm in the Philadelphia area, part of, you know, trying to get more involved with Green Building United, and I live in Swarthmore. Yeah. But I have, you know, just starting to get a little bit politically involved in Chester. And, you know, we have a lot of groups. There's, you know, we have huge environmental problem. We have the biggest incinerator in the US and at Covanta. So there's a lot of environmental justice issues. And, you know, there's just a lot of housing issues that we have. And I just think that housing is such a fundamental infrastructure problem that we're talking about as a nation. And that is so empowering. And, you know, it's great when, you know, we can have Habitat for Humanity come in, but like a lot of projects are just not going to be that. They're going to be, you know, people especially in that gray zone of like lower middle income, you know, because then you're not qualifying for everything, right? So you have to figure out a way to, you know, do this stuff with the means that you have. And how can we like both do the actual building and also then recognize it? Because at the end of the day, we're asking individual clients and homeowners to invest more than they have to by code. So, and that's you have to convince somebody to drop hard-earned cash or future earnings to do that. And I'm struggling a little bit to understand that. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks. It's, you know, retrofits, not easy. Especially with all the I mean, there's, anyway. But our next issue will be on retrofits, and I hope to bring at least a lot of examples to that issue so that people can learn and, you know, pick out what's useful from the examples.
Following that, I just had a comment. I know this might not relate directly to single family homes, but more multi-residential buildings. I know here in Ontario, particularly in Hamilton, we have a lot of funding options. They're doing something called the rapid housing movement, where they want to try and get up as many buildings as they can in a short time span, and they're providing funding for them, and they're all going to be passive house construction. They do give incentives, I do believe, in terms of getting certified. They give you funding for that, I believe, as well. Retrofitting, I think they give you funding for improving it by 55%. I think you qualify for funding through either the City of Hamilton or the CMHC. So that's just us here in Ontario. I've dealt with particularly. I'm not sure how it relates to single family homes, but definitely something to look into to see if there's any funding or even breaks on permits from the city. If you're improving your building by 55%, that they'll give you breaks on your permit fees or anything like that. Just something I thought I would chime in.
Thank you so much, Josie. And yeah, thank you, Samina, for expressing all of that too. Affordability is always an issue that we're trying to talk about more here. And not to plug the policy summit again, but hopefully we'll be diving more into the affordability issues in our next summit as well. Looks like Patricia had a question about high schools and including younger women.
I just wondered if the high schools were more open and welcoming to young women, to, you know, girls, or young women, whatever they call themselves, in construction classes in high school.
And
in
I don't
my high school, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say anyone should feel free to answer.
In my high school, I actually took those courses. I will say this was back many years ago, but I was the only girl. I think there was maybe one or two more in the architectural design ones, but in the woodworking shop classes, I was the only girl. But the teachers themselves were very welcoming, and they almost give extra praise or attention to the females because they want to try and keep you coming back every year. But I don't know how it's changed since I've been there. But as far as my experience, the teachers have been welcoming and encouraging. It's just getting the word out to fellow students.
Yeah, I know up here in Ontario, there's lots of work being done to try to encourage more people into any of the trades programs, like just across the board. And I'm definitely seeing some interesting work being done to recruit people in sort of through interesting ways. And I think from what I've experienced and what a lot of other teachers I've talked to have experienced is that a lot of women or a lot of the high school girls, because ultimately some of these girls are, 13, 14, 15, they don't think they're interested and they're not initially interested because they just can't really imagine what it is, or they have an image in their mind of what it is, but it's not appealing to them. And so I have seen a lot of teachers either starting up sort of like lunchtime woodworking programs for girls, or even a particular class specifically for girls who are interested in joining, but sort of are hesitant about joining a class full of, 15-year-old boys. Or there've been some other teachers who've done, more like kind of design or craft classes. And as soon as they sort of open these doors, then women come in and they're like, oh, this is great. This is so fun. Of course I want to do this. And then they start signing up for like the framing class or the auto mechanics class because they actually like get in there and see how exciting it is. So, I mean, it's hard to promote the trades to people in high schools generally. It's, every board, every school has its own programs, but I'm definitely seeing some pretty innovative and sort of fun ways of trying to draw people in to show them how fun it is. So I hope it continues to work.
I'd like to add, if I may, I'm a college student right now, so I was in high school relatively recently, and I was part of the scenic design and construction crew for technical theater. And I feel like even though it might be slightly a stretch just because obviously building standards are different for when you're building for a theater production rather than actual lasting construction, my construction crew was almost entirely female based, which was very cool. But I noticed that the woodworking classes that were at the school were almost entirely male. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a potential outreach to focus on maybe the technical theater side of construction, and maybe potentially reaching a much more gender and sexuality and race diverse crowd from that area.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. That sounds like fun. That sounds like a really fun way to get into it.
Looks like we had a question from Shannon a bit back about Passive House initiatives. Do you want to come ask your question, Shannon?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Sydney. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I think you muted, but it looked like you responded. So my question was to the panelists. I wanted to ask if they're familiar with the incentives like the ones through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Authority that really helped make Passive House more affordable by putting it into the low income housing tax credits and helping us all tunnel through the cost barrier for high performance homes and affordable housing. If maybe those paths could be leveraged, do they see that those paths might be able to be leveraged to support more female builders, more site professionals? And in the habitat discussion, this is part 2 of this question, is zoning the answer, right? So incentives and zoning, is it like the 2 tools that we need to get more women in the construction field, more women in the site professions, and also the affordability piece? Do any of the panelists want to speak to that?
Not really the expertise of most of the panelists, I don't think, aren't necessarily involved in affordable housing incentives. But
sorry, Mary James, maybe I was not clear enough. In trying to help push this forward on the affordability front and the inclusion front, what are our best tools? Like, and I guess my question is, do we think it's zoning? Do we think it's incentives? Do we think it's trade schools? You know, does anyone see zoning or incentives as maybe a path? A certain percentage of females in the workforce, for instance.
I think a lot of it has to do really with creating inclusive work environments that can focus on retention and employee retention. I know that I've had certainly an uphill battle at all of my workplaces, feeling you know, so much in the minority. So I think it, you know, I think that the unions have done a great job of attracting and retaining people of color as well as women in the workforce. So just traditionally underrepresented in the construction industry. So that's just the first thing that comes to my mind is you know, really making and inviting women and people of color in, and listening deeply to, you know, what we have to offer as a means to, you know, begin to shift the environment and make us want to stick around.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much.
This is Becky. This is Becky from Walsh in Seattle, and I was in the development side of affordable housing for 20 years, and then now on the construction side. And we've been part of various efforts to push performance in affordable housing as well as hiring goals. And I think the caution is just layering too many priorities on any one project that all might have some cost associated with them, despite the benefit of the outcomes. But where we've seen success is where there's very intentional work done within the development community and within the organizations that are building. So very early goal setting of, you know, what's your performance goal, what's your hiring goal, and what's your cost target, and really doing that early collaborative work among the folks that are responsible for the funding side, the designers and the builders, and getting them all at the table as early as possible. And we've found more recently that we've been able to layer in all those three at a reasonable cost target. But it takes a lot, very willing participation by all those three parties and incentives. And so that can be the tipping point for an owner that, wants to do a good building, but doesn't necessarily care about passive house level, or it just kind of doesn't have the capacity to consider they think passive house is too complex. But you get a utility provider at the table and a good building engineer. And if we've seen those two pieces can really help push a team over kind of over that beyond code hurdle. But it involves a lot of early effort.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, I know. I loved, somebody was saying too many priorities on one project. That's can be a problem on a project. But I do know, and I wasn't able to track down any of the trades that worked on this project, but there was a project in Brooklyn a few years back that was where the owner required 25% women working on the project. And, if anybody knows any of the women that worked on that project, it was the Novo Foundation. I'd love to hear about their experiences and how, because that was a passive house project. It's one thing to find women in trades. It's another thing to find women in trades who have actually worked on passive house buildings. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that. But I have to say, the chat has been incredibly enlightening, and thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And we're now drawing to a close. Really appreciate everybody, and I look forward to seeing you at future Passive House events, including our policy summit that will be coming up on April 26th. So thanks everybody for coming. And thank you all of the panelists who were really great.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.